Okay, so I'm now going to introduce the event, and we'll get started. So first of all, we're all here because in 2009, there was a law that was passed that required the state to set an accessibility standard. That law said, and I quote, told that the state CIO shall develop accessibility standards applicable to technology, software, and hardware procurement. And it said, and I quote, the Chief Information Officer, that's now Commissioner Tomes, shall require state agencies to adhere to the standard. Now, as you all know, one thing to make a law and another to make it work. So that's what we're going to talk about today is where do we go from here after you made the law? So now I'm going to turn myself off. And Commissioner Tomes, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Stacy and Cheryl, for being here as well. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Go on, Tarek.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Jay. My name is Tarek Tomes. I am the Commissioner of Minnesota IT Services and the Chief Information Officer for the state of Minnesota. And as Jay has referenced, we're here today to celebrate a lot of work that has moved forward since 2009 and really to celebrate the work that state agencies have done and standards that have been put into place, while also maintaining and not forgetting how much work still lies ahead in this space. And I continually am overwhelmed both by the progress that has been made and how we have to continue to maintain focus in this really, really critical area. One of the things that has been highlighted through this pandemic, through the COVID-19 pandemic, is just the importance of inclusion and equity. And when we face a crisis like this one, we see many of society's largest inequities magnified. Inequities related to education, healthcare, employment opportunities. And I think certainly because the unprecedented need to provide and share information, we also see how important it is to provide and share information from an accessibility perspective, because it is really vital whether people are looking for unemployment benefits or looking to see where they can spend some time outdoors safely in one of our amazing state parks, or maybe someone's receiving emergency food benefits, and the need to share this information in an accessible manner that supports multiple languages, as well as the various accessibility needs of our community, is incredibly, incredibly important. One of the things that I think is important, and I think it's a journey that we're still on, certainly not a journey where we're anywhere near the destination, is creating content in an accessible manner really has to be just the default and de facto way that content is created. It really has to become something that we don't even think about. The tools and constructs for creating content automatically account for that. And we know that that's not the case yet. A lot of training is needed. Tools have to be turned on, special tools have to be created. And as such, I think we all have to continually lobby the various content creation technology organizations to really just build in an ability to create accessible content natively into these services and applications. Earlier today, in a different panel, we had a chance to hear from Chris Taylor, the state's Chief Inclusion Officer, and he spent some time with a couple of individuals that were really instrumental in implementing the digital accessibility and usability standard. And since that time, so much amazing work has been done. I'm really lucky today to be joined by two amazing leaders from organizations that certainly lead from the front, that share tremendous information with so many people that rely on this information. I actually, this is a little bit of a different role, new role for me, and I think I'm going to kind of like this in that I get to be the interviewer and have such amazing panelists that are joining today that we can interview. I'll be speaking with the Chief of Staff from the Department of Human Services, Stacy Twite, and with Commissioner Sarah Strommen from the Department of Natural Resources. And so I maybe have to go off script at some point and just sneak in a couple of extra questions. We'll see where we go here. Commissioner Strommen, maybe if I could just start with you, if you could just introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about how DNR prioritizes inclusion and equity.
Absolutely. So again, I'm Sarah Strommen. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I have been with the department since 2015. I served as an assistant commissioner before taking on this role as commissioner, and I'm really honored to serve in this role. Commissioner Tomes, I want to say thank you to you too for creating this opportunity to celebrate this important milestone and to recognize the importance of accessibility of our digital information. This is something that really, as you noted, is a priority for DNR equity and inclusion. And just to step back and walk people through our business case for that, our mission is to work with Minnesotans to protect and conserve Minnesota's resources, to provide outdoor recreation opportunities, and to provide for the commercial use of natural resources in a sustainable way. And so when we say work with Minnesotans on these really important resources that make Minnesota the state it is, the reality of what we've seen over the past number of years is that the folks who visit our facilities, the folks who participate in our public processes and meetings, that demographic is really diverging from the demographic of Minnesota as a whole. And so if you think about the future of our resources, think about the people who are going to care and steward for those resources, think about the next generation of natural resources professionals. We really need to pay more attention to making sure that all Minnesotans are included in the work that we do. So that means making sure that, and you noted the pandemic, getting outside is a really important way to promote health and wellness. We want all Minnesotans to have access to those health and wellness benefits that our outdoors provide. So for us, that means making sure that we are creating a workforce that looks like Minnesota, that is more diverse and inclusive. It means making sure that the spaces and facilities and work that we manage are welcoming and inclusive. And those spaces include our digital spaces and the information, because so much of that space that we manage and information we provide happens in the digital format. So we are putting increasing emphasis on diversity and inclusion and equity in all of those spaces.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Commissioner Strommen. So before we dive in, I'll ask the same question of Stacy. Tell us how DHS prioritizes inclusion and equity, and give us an introduction to you.
Great. Well, thanks, Commissioner Tomes. Again, I'm Stacy Twite. I serve as Chief of Staff at the Department of Human Services, and I'm here today on behalf of Commissioner Jody Harpstead, who was unable to be here. So thank you for having me. And while I've been Chief of Staff at DHS for about 9 months, which seems crazy to think about in a pandemic world, but I too recently celebrated my 10-year anniversary of state service. I've actually been with the department about 12 years, and ironically enough, I guess, I started as an intern working on employment of people with disabilities in our Disability Services Division, which really included efforts to make our services and supports more accessible. So this is a topic that's close to my heart and something I've had an opportunity to work on many people throughout the years on this topic. And really that stems from not only working with partners and providers throughout our community in Minnesota, but also our coworkers and the difference accessibility makes not only for the people we serve, but each other as public servants. So it's the law, and it's really the right thing to do. So although there's always more we can do, I've seen so much progress over the last 10 years for inclusion of people with disabilities. And really that commitment continues to grow under Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan's leadership, and to making sure everyone has a seat at the table, and that One Minnesota really means One Minnesota, and that we're including all voices and perspectives. So we at DHS provide really crucial services, as many of you know, to over 1 million Minnesotans every year, about a quarter of our state's population. And many have disabilities. About 15 to 20% of the general population has some degree of disability, whether permanent or temporary. So we've really worked hard at making accessibility a top priority for us at DHS. We've invested time and other resources, and that really includes having a strong governance around accessibility and holding ourselves accountable to having those standards in place. We've also hired a full-time digital accessibility coordinator to make sure that when people come to the door of the Department of Human Services, they know how to get those services, and it's as easily and as accessible as possible. And of course, we really are grateful for our strong partnership with you, Commissioner Tomes, and your agency at Minutes, and really look forward to continued progress and how we continue to improve over time. So I really appreciate being able to be a part of this conversation today.
Oh, terrific, terrific. And certainly with the rate of innovation and the pace of change as it relates to digital opportunities, really making sure that we have a human-centered approach, that we put people at the center of the solutions that we create, and we start with who are going to be the recipients of the services and how might they use them, and just build accessibility and access and equity and an ability to measure and understand how our services are impacting people. That's really fantastic. So if I could ask each of you, over the past few years, what are some of the ways that staff have integrated digital accessibility into their everyday work? Stacy, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. So we know that we need to give people the tools to be successful. And you hit that really on the head, Commissioner Tomes, when you said, how do we build that in? So we don't even really think about it. So part of that for us at DHS has really been prioritizing our accessibility training. So we provide classroom training on how to create an accessible document. We promote our online accessibility trainings really to build people's capacity, right? Work that muscle, right? It's just that muscle memory. And also encourage people to continue to improve their skills over time through our annual development plans, and also giving credit. Really, diversity credit is applied for employees who do those courses. And we really aim to kind of build that into our work from the beginning as we design new things. So it kind of moves it from beyond the checkbox, did we do the basics, to really embedding it into how does that look for heading styles and documents, for example, and formatted tables and alternative text. We also have tip cards that we've distributed to thousands of employees. And if I was sitting at my desk in downtown St. Paul right now, which I'm not, I'm here in my home, but I would hold up my laminated cards, which I sit on my desk every day and are right there as a reminder. Oh yeah, how do I put in that alt text into that graphic or whatever I have in that document? We've also done a lot around celebrating Global Accessibility Awareness Day with other state agencies, really reinforcing the positive growth we've seen and the progress we continue to make. And then in best practices, especially in remote meetings. So Jay, I really appreciated your intro around what we can do as we have more WebEx and Teams and Skype and all of these meetings. How do we know what to do to make sure everyone can fully participate in those meetings? And then the third thing I would just say is that we've really built capacity to support accessibility in our websites and our content through governance. So really having that accountability structure in place. So our staff who post web content are trained in and accountable for ensuring our content is accessible. And our governance work group really identifies those issues should they come up. And then having those kind of real-time supports for staff as well are important as we do run into issues or questions about how to do something, that there is really that infrastructure there to support staff to do it well.
Excellent. Commissioner Strommen?
Yeah, well, I just want to echo the phrasing you used in the question about how the question is really about how it's integrated. And Stacy touched on this too, because I think that really is at DNR also the goal. It's to integrate accessibility from the get-go. And, you know, that wasn't the case when we started this work, right? When we started, I think very few staff really were familiar with the term electronic accessibility or digital accessibility. And then they became more familiar and moved to a phase where, okay, we knew documents have to be accessible, so we're going to create them the way we like to, and we're going to send them to an accessibility expert who, after the fact, can remediate them and put them into an accessible format before we put them out and available. And now we're in a place where we just create them to be accessible from the get-go. And as Stacy said, a lot of that is really investing in staff, investing in the capacity and the training. So we have about 900 DNR staff who have taken the Word document training. That continues to grow. People are taking, other format trainings as well. We also we have a creative services unit within DNR that does a lot of our graphic design for products. We've moved from a place where they would sort of oversee the sending out of documents and the putting them into accessible formats to now where they have the capacity and skills to do that in-house. And so just one example that I think is a good one is the DNR fishing regulations book. And, it's summer in Minnesota. Everyone wants to get out on the water and wet a line, especially because it's one of the safe things you can do during a global pandemic. And that fishing regulation book is really important because the regulations vary from lake to lake, and they vary from species of fish to species of fish. And if you can't have access to that regulation book and understand what the requirements are, the greater chance that you just won't go, or that you might have a friendly visit from one of our conservation who will help you find that. And, we don't want folks who have disabilities to have a greater chance of not going or getting the visit from a conservation officer. So that's a document where, we would generate it and then have to send it out. And the process would take longer, it was clunkier. Now we just create it as accessible from the get-go, because that's what we should be doing. Again, we want everyone to have access to understanding those regulations, mostly because we want them out enjoying the activity. So this is also part of our new employee orientation. We talk about digital accessibility so that people from the moment they start their employment with DNR, they know that this is just the way that we do this.
That's excellent. From listening to both of you, it is so clear how important culture is in really making progress and making this work, and just a culture that really understands. As I was listening, I was just struck by thoughts that are unrealistic. But what if I wrote a document that can only be read by men, or wrote a document that can only be read by women, or only by young people, and I think not using it as a bolt-on, but really, as both of you alluded to, just that culture that understands that this is what we do and how we do it from creation. That is outstanding. Can you give some key successes at your agency? Just a few examples, maybe. Maybe Sarah, we'll start with you this time.
Sure, I'd be happy to start. Yeah, and I think one success I would highlight is just that culture change, and I think that shift in mindset and understanding to really think about our digital spaces in the same way we think about our physical spaces. So, to your point, it's really obvious, right, in one of our state parks that we might want someone with a physical disability to be able to enjoy the park. Now we think the same way in terms of people with other types of disabilities having access to our digital space and our digital information. And so I think that shift in mindset and culture is a real success. I think another high level success is just the shared commitment on the part of our agency leadership and our staff. And when we started this work, it was actually led by our deputy commissioner, Barb Naramore, who was then also an assistant commissioner. And so we have a nice consistency to the leadership, not only for the agency, but for this digital accessibility work. And so that runs through our leadership team. It's also really ingrained in staff. We also have a full-time electronic accessibility coordinator, Rebecca Astrike, and she does a fabulous job of coordinating the champions or designees that we have in each one of our 7 divisions, who then go out and coordinate with staff in their area. And so it really is this shared ownership between leadership and staff, and this commitment, I think, that has made our program successful. I will just share one project, because I think this is really good work with the MAPS community of practice, and is a really good example of why this is so important to the DNR's work. But as folks probably can imagine, maps are a really important way that we convey information at the DNR. It's how you, and if you're a deer hunter, how you find out in the area where you hunt, what the regulations are. It may be the way that you find out about groundwater availability. It may be the way that you look at mineral potential in various areas. We use maps for all kinds of things. And obviously maps can be tricky. A lot of times you're using color and symbols to denote different things. And if the contrasts aren't accessible to everyone, then that information isn't being conveyed to those folks. And so the MAPS Community of Practice group, co-led by Minute and DNR, another great partnership, was formed to really develop, to put together and to publish some guidelines on map production to make them accessible. And they've been nationally recognized for that work that they've done. And it, again, has become the way that we do business. But I think a really good example of how folks can come together and put their minds to something and really make a difference on the ground.
Excellent, Stacy. How about a few examples from DHS, a couple of key successes?
Yeah, well, to echo what Commissioner Strommen mentioned, we too found just really embedding the accessibility staff and resources into the agency has been really important. So just to echo what the Commissioner mentioned about having that accessibility coordinator and that close relationship with Minute has been really valuable to our success. We've also created an accessibility policy specifically for DHS as well, and then a governance structure which really wraps around that policy. So we have a governance committee, a training and communications team, and then a review team to evaluate any exceptions. So if there is something that we can't navigate, how are we going to grant an exception, and then have a plan to work forward to a better solution going forward. So that's kind of the internal side. On the external side, as I mentioned earlier, we serve, of course, a lot of people with disabilities across the state of Minnesota. And one of our biggest successes is a relaunch of Disability Hub MN. So I'm doing a little plug for our website here, but disabilityhubmn.org is being rebranded and relaunched. So if you yourself have a disability or a family member or friend, a network, it's a great resource to learn about what opportunities, services are out there to help people solve problems, navigate the system, and really plan for your future. It's a free resource that we help to administer. So the Disability Services team who supports that site created all of the accessible materials and websites that went into that. And it was really embedding it from the planning stage. So from the get-go, having accessibility in mind when we initially started thinking about this project was really key. And also then putting that in our vendor contracts. So how are we not only holding ourselves accountable, but as we bring on outside vendors, making sure that those responsibilities are clear in those policies as well. We have a really clear and publicly available accessibility statement so that we're very clear on what our expectations are so that people can hold us accountable if we're not meeting that standard. And then again, how are we triaging any of those issues and fixing them as quickly as possible so that we know when issues do come up, we have a way to get them resolved. That's been a really key part as we learn and continue to evolve. And really as technology changes and we learn about new things that are available and ways we can adapt and move forward.
Oh, that's excellent. So pivoting just a little bit, and I have found it is, really an important, I guess, enabler, I think, for our workforce is to understand that, we don't always get things perfect right away. And change is rarely easy. Can you give a couple of examples of how DHS, maybe had a bad experience with something and used it as a kind of a launching pad to either improve that or improve a process related to making things accessible? And Stacy, we'll start with you. Sorry. I'm just kind of pivoting back and forth.
Yeah, no problem. So I think it is, again, I think I've mentioned this already, but how do we kind of build in that accessibility and track those issues over time and find solutions and hopefully prevent them from happening again? So we do have a complaint process and a team of people who triage complaints from our website in particular. So they research who owns that content. As you know, we're a very large state agency. We offer services to many people. So sometimes tracking down who owns that content, what is that page about, and who can go about getting it fixed can be a bit of an undertaking. So we do have a team of people who can triage that content, make the connection with a person with a disability who brought up the complaint, and bring it to that content owner to really address that issue. And then we have a reporting structure that goes back to our accessibility coordinators and then the Minute Office of Accessibility as well to make sure we're keeping track and reporting on those as well.
Commissioner Strommen, how about an example of where maybe something didn't go quite as well with DNR and use that as an opportunity?
Yeah, I have an example that is very vivid in my mind because it involved our state park reservation system when I was in my assistant commissioner role. And so I was in a number of these conversations, and it goes to a point Stacy made earlier too about thinking not only internally, but making sure we're paying attention to our vendors as well. And so our state park reservation center system is managed by an outside vendor. And in the last contract and iteration of that, we thought we had made it clear that that system needed to be accessible, both the front end piece that customers use as well as the back end piece that our staff use. And frankly, they didn't deliver that element to us. And I think as we went back and forth with the vendor, it also caused us to look internally into where maybe were we not as robust in our process there that we needed to be. And so I think, again, to this point of integrating accessibility from the beginning rather than waiting till we had a product and then realizing it wasn't accessible, we now think differently about the way we do our RFP process. And, we have more specificity in our language. We ask vendors for examples. We make sure that our electronic accessibility coordinator is involved in the process. And then that attention to accessibility follows through the contract negotiations and through the monitoring and ensuring that product development is there rather than waiting for the end. So I think we've really shifted how we work with vendors on those kinds of things to parallel that building from the get-go that we do within our own agency.
So staying, Commissioner Strommen, maybe staying with you just for a second, and I've seen certainly kind of accelerated examples related to COVID, but I think it exists just in general. Tell us a little bit about how DNR, balances competing, needs as it relates to time and creating content and website and providing services and maybe even legislative deadlines, and how do we bring all that together and how do we prioritize different aspects?
Yeah, well, I think the first step, honestly, is to not view those elements as competing. So developing a product that isn't accessible isn't really developing a product that serves our agency. Developing a product that didn't have appropriate public engagement in it isn't developing a product that serves our agency. And so it's really thinking about it as an integrated process and project, so that you build in time in those deadlines to have your engagement process, to make sure that you are addressing accessibility, to make that really a seamless process. And I think really we need to shift our mindset. And I think it's sometimes if deadlines are imposed upon us, that's a conversation that we're obligated to have about the time that it really takes to do the project. Because the reality is, if we wait till the end and we didn't have engagement, somebody doesn't like it, it isn't accessible, somebody can't use it, it's not serving us, and it causes a delay. And so it actually, I think, in terms of those needs, if we address them all up front, we have a better chance of making sure that they're all integrated seamlessly and that we're actually getting the product that everyone had in mind.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Stacy, how about DHS as it relates to just prioritizing all of these different components that go into bringing something that is really available for all?
Yeah, well, we of course strive for 100% accessibility, and when we can't get there, we need to work with teams to really assess the needs and the circumstances of that team and of the content, and really develop that plan to make it accessible within a reasonable amount of time, much like Commissioner Strommen was saying. So it's kind of breaking down those pieces to make sure we're not missing opportunities along the way, and then also not forgetting about, okay, we said we were going to make this adjustment. Let's make sure we're holding ourselves accountable to that plan. So we're beginning a process of creating some guidelines for employees to better promote an understanding of those expectations. And I know we're working closely with your team, Commissioner Tomes, around accessibility in the IT space. So around the project management, the development phase, through that contract negotiation, if there is one, and then procurement. So really kind of breaking accessibility and a big concept down into those pieces to make sure we're not losing anything along the way.
And that's where I think, conversations like this, as well as just the larger conversations that, happen really year round, where we broadly share, ideas, processes, things that have worked, at times even building blocks for tools. That reusability and sharing, I think, is really, really important. So thinking about, Stacy, we'll stay with you. So thinking about, and I actually love this interview format because it's very new to me, and I love being able to ask questions and then just hear such bright thoughts. So thinking, a little bit about COVID-19 and how COVID-19 in such a short time has just, dramatically changed our world, where there's a hyper digitization, if you will, in all aspects of our lives, whether how we order food, how we get a cup of coffee, how we renew our driver's licenses, and in all aspects. How has DHS made sure that even in this time, services are accessible, and maybe a couple of success stories related to something specific to COVID-19?
Well, I'll start internally, and of course, you hit it spot on the head, Commissioner, about just everything everyone's facing with learning new tools. And I'm excited. I'm on my first Teams meeting this afternoon. I've yet to be in a Teams meeting. I've done a lot of WebEx, a lot of Skype. So we'll see how I do with Teams. I'm a little anxious about it.
I can't wait to check in with you.
Okay, all right, it sounds good. But we've really been leaning on our staff and the expertise we have in-house to help us create etiquette documents. So what Jay shared at the beginning about don't use the chat. I myself was in a meeting a couple weeks ago where I didn't know that, and I had typed something in the chat. I think it was even like, hey, I'm headed to another meeting. I need to log off. And here, was really disruptive to someone else. So how are we acknowledging, okay, we have some work to do on some of these tools, but these are the best practices to best navigate. And the document covers a variety of disabilities and assistive technologies. And our People with Disabilities Employee Resource Group helped author that document. So really working with our employees who have disabilities, who use these tools to know what works and what doesn't. And I would be remiss if I didn't do a shout out to our accessibility coordinator, Lali Lieski, who I've known for many, many years, and who I often think back on when she taught me not to use spaces between paragraphs, and to have different tools to make sure our documents are accessible. So we continue to learn as we go. Microsoft Teams, we've continued to do a lot of testing with Teams, to kind of pick on Teams here a little bit, but really doing usability testing. That was really important to us. We're kind of a later agency on implementing Teams, but working with the Minute Office of Accessibility to design an accessibility issues review process for Teams. So as things come up, which we know they might, how are we going to quickly resolve those things? I think that's one example of where having that on the front end is really going to be helpful. And then the pandemic just generally has impacted so much of our human services service system. We've, through Governor Walz's executive order, have flexed hundreds of rules and regulations to try and get information to people as quickly as possible. And we've really relied on accessibility protocols to still try and get information out in unique and different ways to make sure no one was left behind from the changes we were making in real time. And of course, creating this all from home in a new environment with kids in the background has had its struggles, but it's an essential service, and we need to treat accessibility as an essential service.
Commissioner Strommen, how about DNR and COVID-19 both impact, internal and external, and just a couple of examples, that may jump out related to the need to quickly, pivot through these, difficult times.
Yeah, well, obviously, like as you noted, the rest of the world, we've had to shift a lot of service online. So we are encouraging people to get their park permits ahead of time before they arrive at the park online, because many of our ranger stations are closed. We are encouraging people to get their fishing and hunting licenses online. We have a lot of this park information available online. And so I am just incredibly grateful. And I think it really speaks to the need to plan for these things. I'm grateful that we've had the process in place, that a lot of our information already was accessible. And as Stacy noted, we've had those procedures and protocols in place, because with COVID, we were recreating so many protocols for the health and safety of our employees and the way they do their work, that to already have that accessibility piece baked in, I think is really, really important. And so, there's obviously more work to do as we continue through this and continue to put more information out there. We're trying to do more kind of fun, interactive experiences in the digital space too. And so making sure that those are accessible and available to everyone is really important. And then I think this is a really good example too of why accessibility is not just beneficial to folks with disabilities, but it's beneficial to everyone, right? And I think we're experiencing that right now as everyone is moving to the digital online. These pieces we have in place are really benefiting everyone. So again, I think it's understood that this is the right thing to do for everyone, for all Minnesotans.
So Stacy, why is it important that we celebrate accessibility and talk about the standard today?
Well, it's so important to just pause, right? Just as people and everything going on in our world, to just celebrate where we've come. 10 years is a long time, but it's not a long time. So it's amazing how much to think about how technology has changed in that timeline, and also the importance of, oh, something is beeping at me here. Oh, excuse me for a minute. Okay. To really celebrate the hard work of our many, many employees who've been dedicated to this work and seen us get to the place we are at. And then, like, where do we go forward from there, and continuing to reinforce this is continuing to be working that muscle, right? We need to continue to exercise this as a pattern so that it really is embedded and continues to move along with the technologies that continue to be developed in our world right now. So we have come a long way, and I'm just so proud to see the things we have done and excited to see what comes next.
Oh, excellent. Commissioner Strommen, why is it so important to celebrate accessibility and talk about the standard today?
Yeah, well, I'm going to just echo some of what Stacy said, is that I think right now, people need to recognize good work. So much of our work is challenged right now that I think to take a moment and pause and recognize accomplishment and demonstrate to ourselves that we can make progress, and we have made progress in this area of accessibility, I think is really important. And I really appreciate, this part of the conversation about what's next too, and to share those ideas and to strive for further advancements and that continuous improvement, and to remember to put those who we are serving at the center of it. Is you always remind us, Commissioner, which I appreciate. And I think that this is a really important moment, simply because what we were just talking about with COVID-19, the vast majority of Minnesotans are so reliant on digital space for their most basic needs. And so I think to talk about digital accessibility and its importance, to make sure that we are not leaving any Minnesotans behind in that, this is a really important, this is just the moment, I think, to recognize it.
I love that, and honestly, how can you not get fired up about, obviously, as a monumental challenge, but also just a monumental opportunity. So, when we think a little bit about our world today, and a little bit of what we talked about, certainly as it relates to just the impact of this pandemic and what that has meant for families that are struggling with education for their kids, distance learning, and sometimes we don't have access to devices, or we may not even have access to the internet, or that distance learning, may not be provided in an accessible manner, and we could go on and on and on. And when you think about the backdrop of the murder of George Floyd and just where our society seems to be in this moment in time, tell me how you see digital accessibility just fitting into the larger conversation about equity and inclusion, which is absolutely top priority for Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, and I think for all of us, as we engage and approach our work every day, it's really through the lens of how can we make Minnesota a better place for everyone. Commissioner Strommen?
Yeah, well, I absolutely think without a doubt that this conversation about digital accessibility is part of the larger conversation about equity and inclusion. And I think that the progress that we've made over the last 10 years on this really provides some lessons learned in how we can identify barriers and how we can work together as state agencies to overcome those barriers and provide accessible services to all Minnesotans. And so I think it started to train our brain a little bit about putting ourselves in other people's shoes and thinking about barriers that others experience that we may not. And my hope is that can serve a little bit as a model to break down, I think, the bigness of some of the other issues that we're tackling. Racial equity, for example, gender equity, some of those things that feel really big. And I think this is just a really good model to show how state government can tackle these issues and can make lives better for all Minnesotans.
Excellent. Stacy?
So DHS has an equity policy that kind of lays out our commitment to equity, in addition, of course, to, as you mentioned, Commissioner Tomes, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, commitment to One Minnesota and equity and inclusion. And part of our equity policy talks about those same principles of engagement and planning upfront and consultation with communities. So that includes people of different racial, ethnic, and geographic differences, but also people with disabilities, and consultation early and upfront about how does this work? How can we improve? When we're designing something, how are we including voices upfront in our process? And that's really no different when we think about accessible documents and digital accessibility as well. Because when we do those things, we know we're in a better place to serve people, but also serve each other as fellow state employees. We at DHS like to talk about it. It says human on the building. And so how are we embracing our whole humanness and being ourselves at work and supporting all the humans in Minnesota, so we can provide better services for each other and also be better coworkers to each other as well. So it really does fit in together with equity and our priorities across the administration.
I really love that. At Minute, we have sort of branded our cultural approach, if you will, as our connected culture. And for us, it's all about the relationships we have with each other and the relationships we have with our co-conspirators and co-creators, our business partners, and ultimately the relationships we have with understanding the needs of Minnesotans that rely on government services. And that connected culture really means everything for us. What would you recommend, Stacy? What can state employees do to make sure that they're being inclusive and equitable to each other, and maybe for each other?
Well, I'll start where I kind of left off. Disability is a part of that intersectionality. It crosses all lines: race, gender, sexual orientation, class, and age, and that each of us has more than one identity. So as we work on our equity work and being together with each other, all of us has more than one identity. And so really having those conversations about how do we continue to grow and learn from each other is important. And how do we make sure we're having people create the spaces for each other to have those conversations and really learn from each other. We want to create a space where we can do that. And we'll continue to learn and grow. No, we're not perfect, but we know we can do better by learning from each other. Also best practices. So when we're doing remote meetings, holding remote meetings, sending those reminders, asking those questions, educating ourselves on accessibility requirements. And is it easy to find? If it's buried in our policies and procedures, people aren't going to be able to find it and use it. So making sure it's really at the forefront and easy to use. And continuing to have those classroom trainings. So if there are classroom trainings provided, a lot of things online right now you can just find and pull up, thanks in part to our COVID world, but reaching out to really utilize those resources that are there. And then similarly, tapping our staff who have the expertise and asking those questions. If you have them, reach out. When in doubt, ask, because there's someone who can help guide you for sure.
Excellent. Commissioner Strommen?
Yeah, I like this question because I think our staff ask all the time, you know, how can I play a role in the department's equity and inclusion work? And so I think, you know, the reality is there are things apart from big initiatives that we might do with an agency or as an enterprise, things that employees can do every single day. And those are things like just being aware of our own unconscious biases. You know, it's not a bad thing, we all have them. And learning to be more aware of them is helpful. I think making sure that we are seeking out those experts within our agencies to foster our own learning, seeking out colleagues with experiences or backgrounds different than our own helps that learning experience. I think the meeting structure and format is super important, especially with meeting formats changing and making sure that we're aware of you know, differences in learning styles, differences in abilities that may affect how people can participate in those meetings, and making sure that as we structure meetings that just even the people in the room too, do we have multiple viewpoints represented, or are we kind of all of a similar viewpoint and we're not going to get a robust discussion and we're not as inclusive as we could be. So I think there's all of those number of things that people can do really every day, integrating and thinking more about inclusion in their daily work.
Excellent. So last question for each of you. Commissioner Strommen, in your time as a commissioner, and Stacy, in your time as a leader and as chief of staff, you know, what have you learned about your agency's ability to be inclusive, and you know, maybe just share a little bit near-term and long-term goals. Commissioner Strommen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just start off by saying that, you know, we have a ways to go. We are not as diverse and inclusive as we would like to be. But what I will say I have learned is we have an amazing team of employees. They are very motivated to make those changes. We have just finished a round of listening sessions following the killing of George Floyd, and I sat in those and was just really overwhelmed in the participation that we had, and in the conversation and the commitment and the willingness to, you know, jump in and work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, you know, I am confident that we will get there, and that motivation is to work on it both internally and externally. So some of the things that we are doing, we touched on this a little bit in this conversation, is investing in our staff. So training, you know, digital accessibility, but also diversity, equity, and inclusion training. We are creating space for conversation about these issues. So following those listening sessions, we're going to be launching a diversity chat, which will be a monthly kind of informal space for people to talk about DEI issues. We do a lot of work with the Minnesota Council on Disability, and we have a couple of really cool projects going on in state parks. And so we recently had a new exhibit at Whitewater State Park, for example, and we added an audio enabled component to that, so visually impaired visitors can enjoy that exhibit. We also are really working on a cool pilot project at William O'Brien State Park to make the whole park experience accessible. So clearly, you know, ADA requirements, our visitor center has to be accessible, our parking lot, our bathroom. But the reality is, as I know you know, Commissioner Tomes, because I know you're a state park user, the state park experience is much more than the bathroom and the parking lot. And so we want, you know, people with disabilities to experience that whole experience. And then I think, you know, long term, really we have an eye to building that pipeline of a diverse workforce in our agency. And one of the things we've learned is there are not a lot of people of color and from diverse backgrounds and communities going into the natural resource field. It's not the first thing that some of the communities think about. And so we have launched a great program with our partners at MPPA and the Board of Water and Soil Resources to work with the Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Iowa to get college kids earlier in their career focused on environmental and natural resource career opportunities. And we just finished our first cohort of fellows. They will continue on, but the first group came in. I met with these young folks a number of times, and they are amazing and inspiring. And I said I want to start every day of work meeting with this group of young folks because they are engaged, they are hopeful, they ask really good and thoughtful questions. And so I think, you know, investing in young people and recruiting them into our agency is also something that we're working on.
That's terrific. Stacy, how about you and DHF?
So we've recently started, Commissioner Harpstead is coming up on her 1 year anniversary as Commissioner at DHS here in the next couple of days. And one of her early pieces of work that she started on was really setting DHS on a course to become an anti-racist organization. And part of that was hiring a chief equity officer. So for the first time, we have Dr. Karen McKitty on board here at DHS, and we're really starting with our leadership and having brave conversations and bold conversations about what it means to be an anti-racist organization and having conversations about how we really grow as an organization for each other, our employees, but also for the people we serve. We've got a lot of work to do, but we've tried to really build up a foundation of training and learning so that we can grow as an organization. And part of that includes that intersectionality that I mentioned before and appreciating our whole human selves that we bring to work every day. And so in the accessibility space, you know, that's a part of that training that we need to do. So we've been doing accommodations training for managers and supervisors. We talked about gender identity and what that means for how we support people at work. And so we've really started to try and build that into our training and curriculum and really trying to embed that into our work ongoing. In the accessibility front, we've recently provided feedback and endorsed our agency accessibility work plan. So really driving again to those details of what does this mean for us and kind of breaking it down into those pieces. And in the near future, we really hope to do an accessibility audit to gauge the baseline of our content. Where are we at? Where are our systems at? So that we know where to put our best efforts and monitor improvement going forward. Further down the road, we'll be creating a monitoring and tracking system with kind of some benchmarks for divisions, or many divisions across the agency to track their progress. How are we continuing to implement the best practices and those accessibility standards going forward? So we have a lot more to do, but we have some great, amazing staff at the Department of Human Services that I'm always so thrilled and honored to be a colleague to do the work together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to share with us so many interesting and amazing stories from DHS as well as from DNR. It's absolutely clear that we have agreement about the direction and the need to prioritize this work. Probably not surprisingly, I am incredibly passionate about the role that digital services can play in connecting with Minnesotans and establishing at times deeper relationships for people that consume government services, and also allow us a view into how we can continue to improve those services to make sure that we're serving everyone and in an accessible manner. The opportunity for us to create an innovative digital government that works for all is, I think, so critically important. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is just one, certainly one conversation of many conversations like this that need to happen. I so appreciate these insights and opportunity for the three of us, certainly to continue to hear from people that face these barriers and what their experiences are like to help us shape, our continued thinking. And I know that certainly for both of you and your staff, that those avenues exist. And so this is just one conversation of many, and I think we've touched on the need for that human-centered design approach that keeps people at the center of the solutions that we're creating. So with that, I'm gonna bring Jay back up. Jay, thank you for having us, and certainly thank you to Stacy and Commissioner Strommen for really sharing such amazing insights. Jay?
Commissioner, this is Kendall. Looks like we might have lost Jay, so if you want to just wrap it up for us.
I can absolutely do that. Well, with that, certainly we're not going to blame technology necessarily in this pandemic. Certainly, technology is front and center of all of our meetings, and as has probably happened to many of you, Jay may have had an internet outage or anything else. Please, I think for all of us, our doors are continually open for feedback and thoughts, and we're in this journey collectively together, and certainly realize that we're nowhere near the destination of where we need to be or where we're going, but I think it's a journey that everyone is committed to continuing to work incredibly hard on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good day.